Hello, everybody, and welcome to Living Astrology. I'm your host, Janet Hickox, and I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Bryn Morgaine. Hello, Bryn.
Hi, Janet. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's so exciting. We can tell because you're just glowing. We can't wait to get to the juicy stuff of this evening's talk. Our subject, of course, tonight is Pluto. I titled it something very similar to what you had sort of envisioned, which I thought was kind of funny.
Yep.
A new look at the Lord of the Underworld in astrology. And apparently size does matter because, of course, Pluto was demoted because he wasn't big enough. He was demoted from a planet to a dwarf planet, which I think is such an interesting term, don't you think? Dwarf? Like, I don't know.
Did you
Allison
look up? Did you actually look up the definition of why he became a dwarf planet? If not, I'll
did.
share that with you. Okay.
Yeah, you please do share that if you've
I
got
will.
that, because it was kind of an interesting thing. He met two of the criteria for being a planet, but just one little thing that, got him caught up in bureaucracy, let's say. He's demoted to a dwarf planet, which, by the way, elevated two other bodies that we were using sort of as asteroids or comets, and that was Ceres and Eris. And it's interesting because if we look at the chart of Pluto's demotion, Eris plays a role in that chart. In fact, let me see if I can get this up here for us, because it's an interesting sort of chart. I gotta remember how I do this. Share screen. There we go. So are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a chart set for August 24th, 2006, which I couldn't find the exact time, but I set the chart for noon so we could get an idea of what some of the players are in the chart for Pluto's demotion. What I thought was really interesting is that it happens just shortly after a new moon, and the new moon in Virgo. And of course, Miss Virgo, Bryn, Virgo loves the details. They love to categorize and organize and reestablish the order of things. So it was kind of interesting. Sun and moon begin the adventure for Pluto's demotion in Virgo. And then we also have over here Mars and Lilith conjunct in Virgo. And of course, right now today, Lilith transiting through Virgo again. So that's a 9-year cycle. It's been 9 years since the demotion. And when we have Lilith in Virgo, the shadow that we're working with is the fear of success or failure. So I think it's funny we're dealing with demotion of a planet, as if that could happen, and dealing with the shadow of that, which is success and failure. But what I found most exciting is you can see this little blue triangle here in astrology. For everybody out there that doesn't know astrology, we call it a trine. It shows an ease and flow of information and energy from the planets that are involved. And Pluto, on the day of his demotion, was conjunct the galactic center, which is a really sensitive spot in an astrology chart where a lot of new information is coming into us from what we call the galactic center, which is possibly a black hole, which many of us from the esoteric side of things think of it as maybe the place of the Akashic records or the Akasha. And so lots of information, new information coming to us from that part of the galaxy. And then Eris, one of the planets that was promoted as Pluto was demoted, is part of this trine. And she is also a goddess in this and is the goddess of discord. And then up at the top here, the actual planet that comes closest to being in the trine is Mercury at 23 degrees of Leo. So new communication, a whole new way of looking and classifying the planets in our solar system. And I think it sets the stage for something very interesting because, as you were saying just before the show, Bryn, anytime something changes in the astronomical world, it is also filtering into the way that astrologers are going to deal with, or the collective is going to deal with the information, right?
Right.
So, and there is a lot of buzz about Pluto right now. I mean, just in this week alone, I have heard Pluto mentioned several different times. The first time I heard it was earlier in the week when they were talking about New Horizons, the flyby space mission that will buzz the planet. I think it's July of 2015, so just in another couple of months. And as the New Horizons space probe gets closer, we will be getting to see our first real good look at this demoted planet. and and then I also, we're astrologically in the midst of the seventh of the Uranus-Pluto squares. So, of course, that's in everybody's buzz.
That's right.
And then for me, being in human design astrology, Pluto on Sunday made a change from one gate into another, which fundamentally shifts the energy of transformation, which is what Pluto represents. And so we're going to get into a lot of that energy, but I want to throw this to you now, Bryn, because you have some really fascinating information that you want to share with us and the way that you look at Pluto. And I want to give you as much time as possible to do that. So you take it away.
Thank you, Janet. No, it's
welcome.
I have personally in my own natal chart, I have a Pluto Sun conjunction. So probably because of my own life path being conjoined with working with Pluto, that is probably why I love this planet and am most focused on what I'm surprised other astrologers have not been all over, right? Like white on rice. I mean, I don't know why we're not on this. So you have already explained some of the story. Effectively, my understanding of astrology is obviously nothing in the solar system has changed. Nothing in the solar system changed in 2006. What happens is we sight planets, and when we observe them or conclude that they're there, it's said that that part of our consciousness, something comes alive in our consciousness. We're now working consciously with some aspect of ourselves collectively. So we had sightings of major it used to be for most of human history, the best they could ever see was Saturn, right? Because until we had technology, we weren't actually able to sight planets they had to be major planets, and they couldn't see anything out beyond Saturn. So for a long time, we have this history of astrology. The best they ever do is major planets and Saturn and the moon, and they don't know anything about asteroids, and they can't see anything further. And so certainly a fair amount of astrology is coming up trying to work with what was conscious at that time. Starting in 1781, we see Uranus, and then in mid-1800s, we see Neptune, and in 1930, they knew they were looking for something. They could see shifts in the orbit, and they finally sighted Pluto. And here we go, another planet sighted in 1930. And certainly, as astrologers, there was a generalized narrative that looked at World War II and all of the darkness in World War II and said, this is great emblematic Pluto stuff, right? This kind of dark shadow, power struggle, along with other things that we think Pluto rules, that sort of looked like we'd ripped open our consciousness and out had come this horrific shadow that we're now having to deal with and face. Fundamentally deal with, face, and fight. So they're big, the guy out of Caltech, Mike Brown, right? He's, a Pluto killer. And so he goes out, he's also sighting almost all those planets. I think I also shared with you on another show that I was very surprised at including Chiron. Unbeknownst to me, a huge number, including the guys at Caltech, where a huge number of these planets are actually, or the asteroids and dwarf planets are being sighted using the Palomar Observatory that was right next to my house in California, right by it. And I didn't know that. I knew that I loved that observatory and would go up there all the time, but I didn't realize that's where, oddly enough, I assumed because it was one that was handy to Caltech, and the guy interested in doing it was at Caltech in Pasadena and wanted to go there easily. But anyway, all these ties to this were coming up. So the three criteria that Pluto did not make was that the planet has to be large enough to be round, it has to orbit the sun, and it had to have cleared its neighborhood. In other words, it has enough mass that its mass will force other material to come in, and basically it won't allow anything else to orbit around it much other than a moon. So Pluto had not made the third criteria. It had not cleared its neighborhood. It was round and it orbits the sun, but because it hadn't had enough mass to clear, in other words, not big enough, that's what demoted it. At the same time, they were now sighting a huge number of other dwarf planets. I think there's 200 of them. It's not small. And we now have, I believe, 12,000 between asteroids, Trans-Neptunians, dwarf planets, all this other stuff. There's like 12,000 bodies we've now named orbiting the solar system. So it's a big old crowded world out there. So that in of itself does start in 2006 to presumably need to tell us, okay, what's happened? What's happened in our consciousness that we're seeing this as not only, being brought down a little bit in size? What's happened? And also the fact that it's now joined with lots of other players. What's going on? But the thing that's held me up short, the reason I wanted to come on the show, is actually what's been established and was at the same similar time with Pluto and its moon Charon. Charon was it's a massive moon, and they knew it had what they thought was a massive moon. But Charon, which is named for the ferryman to the underworld, right? Mm-hmm. Is now meeting the same criteria as Pluto, can invariably be called a dwarf planet. And if I can get the gift to come up right now, I can show you my screen and show you, in fact, these two planets orbit each other. So let me
Which is fascinating, because no other planet or no other body that we know of in our solar system does that.
So if you can see this, you'll see. Can you see my screen?
I can see it.
Yeah. So this is Pluto. Pluto is being drug out of and into its own circular orbit by the gravitational pull of this large moon Charon, which means these two planets are actually orbiting a center in the middle of that's not inside either planet. If we stop right there and say this represents our relationship to power, soul, and transformation, we're actually talking about the premier relationship planet in the solar system. We don't have another planet actually in a relationship to a second planet in our solar system.
That's right. It's very unusual, eccentric even in its differences to the rest of the planets in the system. Absolutely.
So that's the piece. The binary planetary system is the piece that held me up short and said, this, as an astrologer, I have got to begin to work with this differently. What does this mean? We cannot accept our old vision of Pluto based on what we've done with it since 1930. Massive changes have happened in our observation of what the truth of that planet is. So here's where I have gone with it. Working with it in my chart and working with it in the charts of my clients that I've been able to see have heavy Pluto. I believe that to some extent, Pluto is showing us now. And again, you're mentioning just the recent shift of Pluto. Mm-hmm. And I think we're actually seeing this basically because of the Pluto-Uranus squares that have just finished. So Pluto and Uranus, the transformer and the revolutionary, right, squaring and forcing integration of the social agendas that we tried to bring forward in the 60s. So the last time they conjuncted, which they did in the 60s, the last time they conjuncted prior to that was in 1850s. Again, the period of time from 1850 to 1876 between their conjunction and their first square is the American Civil War. And the 1850 is the first women's rights convention. We have the Civil War in the mid-60s. And by 1876, the 1876 square is the political election where Hayes wins the election, even though he has lost the popular vote. And it's one of the most contentious American political presidential elections ever, far greater than Gore and Bush.
I was going to say, it reminds me of the Gore and Bush thing. That's the same thing happened.
This was worse because there was no doubt that political corruption at that time, again, Republicans are at this point are the Lincoln Republicans. They are the ones that freed the slaves, and Democrats are the ones trying to keep the South intact. So this happens to be a Republican that wins, and the Democrats are the ones trying to back the Republicans out of the South. But basically, he got the only reason he got by with the corruption that allowed him to win the election was that he agreed to pull out of Reconstruction in the South, which ended the enforcement of rights for blacks to vote. So in fact, it was his backup from implementing that the first square the first time. The presidential election caused him to back up and not continue to integrate civil rights. So we're coming up through this phase again. And what am I seeing? I'm seeing that I think Pluto may show us that in all relationships to our soul, to transformation, then the nature of it is about the relationship. How do we develop relationships with the soul and the shadow? And what is it we have to be sensitive to? And what we need to be sensitive to is to avoid the creation of the all-powerful Oz. So we have a tendency to see the shadow, as we did in World War II, as we have in the civil rights movement, as we have every time we see, I feel that we need to push this agenda forward. We have a tendency collectively to create a great all-powerful Oz as our opponent, a mythological opponent. Very much like, again, I know I keep referring to this inside the United States, and that may not be all our viewers, but to those that are in the United States, I think we can remember what happened in the Cold War. So in the Cold War, we had created a massive adversary in the idea of the Soviet Union. And a huge amount of our time, expense, and resources were devoted to trying to make sure we were big and tough enough to come face to face with this mythologically large and powerful ally, opponent that we believed existed. But it was a great, that was the great shock, right? They backed down, or we believe they backed down, and it turns out they never had any money or resources that they could put behind this at all. This had been a mythological image, part of which had been created for us, part of which they must have participated in. Very similar with the war on terror, right? At this point, this mythological terrorist, as far as where America's putting resources, time, and money. It's not about deciding that terrorists don't exist, or they're all good guys, or we should like them, or any of those things.
Right.
It's when we're relating to Pluto and the shadow in such a way that it's a mythological Wizard of Oz. I mean, pull back the curtain and have a look at who's the guy behind the curtain. In the Wizard of Oz, the wizard is still a wise and knowing man who has valuable things to contribute, but he creates the persona because people responded to that persona and he wanted to appear large and powerful. So that's actually what I believe Pluto is teaching us with its new revelations. Where in our lives are we in fact evoking a mythological shadow opponent? Where have we given it mythological status? And how can we in fact accept, especially in times when we are bringing up and forcing our own time, resources, money, thought, direction to polarize against that. So it then is causing, which again, it starts out in the 60s with the Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo. And as we know, Virgo is a earth sign. It is deemed or thought of to be a mental sign, but it is actually about the efficient use of material resources. So really, how much of our ecological problems come because we're destroying the earth, and how much come because we're wasting the resources that we do have. So if we stopped throwing away food, if we stopped, regardless of how much we produce, how much of it is thrown away? How much of it is destroyed? How much of the land is going to waste? This idea that we're wasting our resources, that is the ill. And that's the same in our personal lives. It's the same with our personal energy, our thoughts, our money, our time. How often are we engaged in devoting that to try and stay safe in the face of or believing in a mythological demon that represents the shadow of whatever agenda we know we need to bring forward?
And so now, how does Sharon play into this? I mean, if it's a binary system,
right?
Well, so there's the two.
Mythologically, Sharon is just the ferryman. What he represented to me, again, we're working with a hypothesis, and we're working with, I'm working with this in charts, and I've said 100 times, this is about moving into new ways and new paradigms.
Right. It's
they
very
have to be vetted. I'm in the process, we are all in the process of doing our own work about vetting what really is being shown to us. So initially, I'm still just accepting Sharon as the messenger that this is about a relationship. So we have the same inner dynamic that I'm describing outside of us. We have this sense that the soul and transformation, how often, how classically is the fear greater than the actual, when you actually do it, it's not so bad as it was when you feared. Right?
When you push through it, it's done.
That's right. And it's never as bad as you fear. Or you're afraid that something awful will happen, and it actually does happen. And the lesson is almost invariably, well, frankly, I lived. I mean, how it's actually the shocking number of things that don't change us, not the things that are about to uproot us and change us forever, that are part of the thing you learn as you get older, right? That's how we get to that place of saying, you know what, this too shall pass. Or, we start to realize things work in cycles. There's developing a relationship, and that the soul is not a place for us to move into or go to and then try and reclaim entirely. It's about communication back and forth. Now, we also know Pluto is a generational sign, a planet. Right. So Pluto in my chart is in Virgo. It's going to be, everybody pretty much born in the 60s, very early 60s is Leo. I think it's well into the 70s before you hit a Libra. But, a whole 10 years of people with Pluto and Virgo. So our generationally, I think it's where we realize the imbalance is happening if we create mythological boogeymen. For instance, again, coming back to what is ecology as a Pluto and Virgo? What does that mean to me, and what does that mean to my generation? Where are we seeing the losses, and where are we most likely to want to say to others, you know what? I'm pretty sure there's a guy behind that, that I don't think that Wizard of Oz is what you think he is, right? It doesn't mean he's nothing. It just means I don't think he's what you think he is. This mythological cannot be transversed. It's also awful person. Then beyond that, where we would look for it personally would be what house is it in my life, which is how we work with the major planets. They are almost all generational, and we mostly work with them by aspect and by house. So where is this showing up in my life? What part of myself do I need to make sure I reclaim my power from? Because it's not about not taking action. It's not, it doesn't exist. It's a boogeyman. It's about how to no longer waste, how to not create, again, the higher octave, Pluto being the higher octave of Mars. How do we stand down? How do we make sure we haven't stood a massive army within ourselves to confront a mythological shadow? We don't want to take too much of our resource, because in fact, every time we rise up and create giant armies within ourselves to confront a mythological demon, we actually become the polarized state to what we fear. We create, in some cases, the shadow we're afraid of. Because if I take an extreme polarity and demonize you, I'm going to, by nature, you're either going to have to ignore me, or you're going to end up being somewhat polarized in relationship. So, there's only kind of two relationships to Pluto. You either it is off your radar entirely and you do not see power struggles, or you are as likely to be confronting large shadows, and on the same time, you are also somebody else's large shadow. You represent the demon to them.
So show us an example. If you want to use mine, you can, or use your own if you're comfortable with that. Tell the audience how this works in a chart that you've seen so far. And I know you're just in the new experimentation of this.
Absolutely. So I think, let me bring up your chart, which I've got in front of me, not on the screen, unfortunately. I've got it in my hand, unless you want to bring yours up. I will say that I think we're seeing this initially really get clarified during the Pluto-Uranus squares. So we have Uranus in Aries, and it is saying revolution, 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 right? And it's Aries has a bit of a blindness to it, right? It's really the divine marching orders. So somebody else is supposed to be the general, but I've been told to attack. And Aries is like, push. Pluto, I think, in Capricorn, has effectively shown us where is this great demon? You know, you're pushing, 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 but where is the great demon that you're fighting? Because all we've actually exposed, for instance, let's look at the Arab Spring. So we saw initially, starting in 2011, we saw this massive shift start to happen with the Arab Spring, right? Just seemed to sweep right through that area. And there was this great ideal, right? This was almost the perfect emblematic example of Uranus revolution confronting the stale, repressive status quo.
I mean, literally, it happens within days of Uranus moving into Aries.
That's right.
I mean, so, it's huge.
And it was so obvious what they had. I mean, the Capricorn that you saw that they were confronting, the status quo, the old order, the stagnant, the repressive father figure. Man, those were classic images. Even though we didn't quite have the exact square, classic images of what the Uranus and Aries was trying to confront.
At the stage was being set. I mean, right then.
And yet, where is it now? So, yep. Well, here's what happened. Uranus won the day. They have revolution, and now they have chosen the Muslim Brotherhood in some of those areas, which we're like, what? But they're like, well, that
blew up in our face.
Well, if we have an agenda about it, that's true.
Well, you know that there was.
Saying, to some extent, blind revolution did not end well for us. We needed to make a big shift, but just, let's blow up now and figure out what we want to do later did not end well. So that, there's sort of a lesson about that would be the first examples I would bring forward. To an extent, we can see that there's a lot of desire, even little things like Bitcoin. Okay, well, here's the repression in the same way in the financial industries. 2008's terrible. We hate you. You're all dogs, and we want you gone. So we're going to create new currencies. Yeah. And so that wasn't the impetus for Bitcoin, but it was the door for people to be interested in other forms of currency, ways to keep these corrupted structures from having control over us. So we certainly don't want the status quo where it is utterly corrupt to repress us and control us. No question. And yet Bitcoin, didn't get stable, was prone to being hacked, and they're struggling because they showed us, yes, just a new currency. If we don't vet it, stabilize it, protect it, in fact, do some of the stuff that the old currency did, isn't actually to our best interest. So at a minimum, Pluto right now is behaving very differently in World War II, right? Where we simply had to, in fact, in World War II, we just pushed and killed and killed and pushed and killed until we finally blew up nuclear bombs and everybody sat down. We literally killed our ways, it pushed back physically.
Well, literally, we held in our hands the power of life and, catastrophic death.
That's right. And those were massive reactions, right? And I'm not a historian other than, and looking back in rearview mirror isn't fair to any war, but you can see one way or the other, this was just overcoming the shadow by force. That is definitely not what we're seeing now. And any attempt we make to overcome the shadow by force appears to simply be, rebel without a cause. There seems to be, we've broken it down, but what are we building that's different? So again, relationship, instead of the revolutionary showing up and deciding, I'm going to plant a bomb, again, back to the 60s, we may realistically look at someone like Martin Luther King and hold him as a tremendous ideal of social revolution. But there was also Malcolm X. And there was, fighting and gun war and bombs and violence. And there was an awful lot of other agendas and mechanisms.
Black Panthers.
That's right. That was not, if you were there, we were. I was living in Southern California as a kid. This was
I grew up there.
And this was a violent revolution. It wasn't a peaceful, we sat down and they're just dogs and bastards. So this is, those are just collective. And I think that's one of the things that's happened with this square is, yes, but we can, in fact, integrate revolution into the status quo. But effectively, we have to not become the shadow to do it. We cannot decide that we have to become as dark as you to make this happen. So and in a way, massive disempowerment to me looks the same as being a warrior. If you claim that they're so dark that you don't have and you can't do anything, effectively you're indulging. I mean, not just long past just the emotional truth of feeling disempowered. There's a kind of underground shadow energy to this that's sort of wallowing in the helplessness. That's also not taking productive action. What are we going to create? We've got to create something new. So even this conversation, as you and I were talking, astrology, we love it. I love it. But we can acknowledge that there is still a great deal of astrology that has been left effectively, back in the times before we could see anything beyond Saturn. So it certainly has got to come forward. It's not, and we could choose to abandon it. That's true. It's archaic. It's no longer applicable. But I don't think that's our answer either. I mean, this is about this relationship is what I see Pluto showing us. Nope. You keep going back and forth. You keep talking, you keep shifting. Let's make changes in Capricorn in incremental ways. What can we solve today? What's something new we can create today? What dialogue can we start today? You're not letting this become a mythological being that we're polarized to. So, having said all that, unless you've got questions, let me pull up your chart.
One of the things that I was just thinking of as you were talking about that is that Uranus in Aries has been very much the revolutionary. I mean, it's a bold energy when you've got it in a sign that's ruled by Mars, and it begs for action. It's just it's chomping at the bit to make change. So we see movements like the Occupy movement and the Arab Spring and all these different things that were pushing for change.
Yeah.
But I think there was a sort of the blind side there was that we were kind of trying to, in some of those instances, throw the baby out with the bathwater. Instead of doing what Pluto and Capricorn's trying to really get us to do is to take the best from the past, take the best of what you have, throw out the unsustainable things, the things that you can't sustain that will not stand the test of time as you move forward. Join that with the new and the revolutionary to create something new and revolutionary that's stable, that's sustainable, that creates a new prototype, a new model, a new paradigm. That's really the energy of what was happening. And so, you see Occupy kind of fizzle out. I mean, we still have some of the sayings, the 99%, or we are the 99%, we have some of those sayings still, but it fizzles out because it didn't answer the question of how do we bridge these two? That's the thing.
And it's funny about the Occupy movement, because quite often what was made aware about that is that those occupiers never were very clear exactly what their agenda was. Now, it doesn't invalidate the movement, and I don't mean
not at all.
But it really did represent the height of the Uranus and Aries part of it, but very little of the integration from Pluto. They didn't know what they were going to change, and they didn't know how they were going to change it. They were just very clear things had to change.
Right,
and so it really did represent it beautifully as far as our collective confusion about that. And even what you're describing about how to go about the change we need. Beautiful, beautiful description of Virgo, right? The organic perfection. So if we go back to where this, again, using Pluto-Uranus square as part of our messenger right now, if we go back to the conjunction in the 60s, that was a conjunction in Virgo. And it's the truth of this square is showing us that kind of Virgo integration, progressive change. You just have to accept it doesn't even have to be that it was ever wrong or bad.
No.
It just has to be acknowledged as obsolete. And even when we do emotional work, soul level work, spiritual work, we all know, never put off those changes. The only time you get to the major crisis with your health, spiritual integration, your soul, is when you've let it incrementally slide, right?
Mm-hmm.
All of those, if you just stayed in touch and made the hard choices, keep doing, go through short-term discomfort for long-term gain. That's all you got to stay with, right? And if we let it start to slide, that's where we see our health go to a crisis point. Our soul goes to a crisis point, etc. That's Virgo says stay with those minute changes.
Well, and the square implies the crisis point. I mean, everything is in crisis at the square. What'll be interesting now that we're in the midst of that seventh and final Uranus-Pluto square for this round, thankfully. And now we have this really good opportunity to see, where does that take us from here? Where do we want to consciously connect with that energy and move it forward? Because 45 years from now, and that I'm not sure what signs it'll be, but they will be in an opposition to each other. And then we'll have this real crisis if we don't deal with it now. If we don't deal with some of these big issues and find positive solutions and ways around the bickering that's been going on, the push and the pull and the us and them and the walls that we put up. If we don't find a way around that, that opposition is going to be hell.
That's right. And the opposition is 2046 through 2048.
And how old will we be? Let's see. I'm 50. We're both the same age. 53. We're going to be in our 90s.
Yes. And then the square is 2073. The second square is 2073. And the final Pluto, the next conjunction is 2104.
Wow. So we've got things to do here.
Yeah. So you know what else is interesting? How much time have we got? So I looked at your chart. You comfortable with me showing your chart on screen?
Sure.
You're not hiding from anybody, eh?
Well, I'm an open book.
You're an open book.
Usually.
So here's what I have for your chart. Again, I use a different program. Can you see that? Okay.
Oh, cool.
That stuff's all that hypothetical stuff. So here's your Pluto. And obviously in the second house, conjunct your moon in Virgo in the second house.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, if I were to just leap to the sound bite about where I think this would show up for you, is you're keenly aware that we must hang on to the emotional integration. In other words, we can say, for instance, you're looking at with Pluto in the second house. I would say core level, you're talking about not only health to our relationship to the planet, but in all ways sustainability. You know what, guys? Is this sustainable? Does this grow corn? And, is it a practical, grounded solution? So you're looking for sustainability. But I would speculate that the thing that you wish to bring to that conversation is, don't deny the emotions of what's happening. It's, how it feels is very important. So don't, that it feels like you're facing a boogeyman is very valid. You may or may not be facing a boogeyman, but it's also going to be unsustainable for us to decide that it doesn't feel that way. It's not valid to say it doesn't feel like it's massive disempowerment, that somebody has a lot of control. It does. Mm-hmm. So hanging on to keeping this, integrating this through the emotional cycles is very different than integrating it through the body or through the mind or through the soul or taking action. So, and also in Virgo with Virgo moon, Pluto, keep it real. And again, I would imagine you're still committed on some level to wanting to keep the efficiency, right? Because we will, what would be I'm trying to get an image. It's like you need to not ground it in your own body, right? You want to feel it and release it without denying that there's emotions involved.
Mm.
So that would be my speculation initially about seeing just how this plays out. But again, I think it's come up before that you also are keenly aware of what drama is when you see it. When people have created giant boogeymans and they're fighting, because again, the people on a collective level, we may think we've polarized and we're now fighting World War II. There's the boogeyman. Personally, though, we know these folk. They're fighting massive boogeymans. It's called high drama, right? People who are in drama all the time have a new mythological boogeyman every week. And then if they don't have one, they watch TV shows that tell them they should have one. And they see the germs on their countertop as the newest version of the big boogeyman that's about to kill their children.
But you know what's funny is that for me, it's always that I call it a sort of bullshit meter that I go through with all these things, right? It's like, okay, you guys are just crazy, right? This is, the boogeyman that you're creating is absolutely insanely see-through. And to me, it's that meter that says, okay, you're not going to convince me that this is the way this is, right? There is a better way. There is a sustainable way.
Yes.
That there is no reason why we have to keep doing things this, bang our heads up against the wall kind of way. There is a new and a better way. And nor are you going to convince me that I'm going to die by some superbug germ that is created because we use, what is it, antiseptics or antibacterial soaps and all this.
Right.
There's just a piece of me that just always is reserved and going, okay, I don't sense the truth here.
Yes. And so, and inside of that, so that again, I'm pretty sure that our whole generation, and we're lucky in a way. I think if you are not born in the 1960s, if you're born after or you're born before, you may still be quite concerned about whether or not there are solutions for these massive problems we're all facing. But almost all of us born in the 1960s with significant Pluto connections and conjunction, energy in our charts.
Mm-hmm.
Virgo is the kind of thing that never tells you about the solution until they have it completely developed. They've vetted it on every level. It's refined to the point of being crystalline, right? Then finally they mention as a throwaway, oh, by the way, I cured cancer, but I have to go.
But okay, I have a great example of this.
Yeah.
And it's from our local area here where there's this big fight going on about the number of coal and oil trains that are going to be able to run on the lines that come through Burlington, Mount Vernon, and into Anacortes, where the Shell and Tesoro refineries are. And every day I'm hearing more and more about this stupid fight. And I keep thinking to myself, but why are we even having this fight when we know for a fact that we could convert to solar, to geothermal, to wind, to any number, to electricity? Why are we even bothering with this old oil fight? And it really irritates me to have that conversation keep coming up around oil and shale and all this need to refine all of this oil, because we could get ourselves out of that so easily. It's not sustainable anymore.
And right. And that's what that's what I believe Pluto is now showing us, that it is backing down. The shadow is saying, I was never what you, at a minimum, if we say Pluto represents the shadow in our collective, if we stop right there, at a minimum, we can say, it's not what we thought it was. Clearly not what we thought it was. It's not only been downgraded, it's actually in a relationship with its ferryman, right? It's about the relationship. It's basically willing to be the premier relationship planet we have, is the one to our shadow and our soul. So Pluto has said, I'm not, and that's the, how often have you seen the warrior come and you felt to yourself, I'm not having that fight. I get you're angry with me, or I get you want change, but honestly, I'm not, in fact, on the other half of this argument. I don't know why we're arguing. Virgo, at a minimum, says, and how much of our time, energy, and resources have we wasted? How much is it that we can solve, and how could we the solutions to this Virgo generation that we're in? I'm fairly sure I'm speaking for all of us when we are so sick of staring out at a world littered with solutions. Yep. There's another 3,100 solutions laying around to all these problems you guys are talking about. And apparently we don't want these solutions. I don't know, why is the Kardashians so fascinating?
They are not. I can guarantee it.
And we kind of think people are mesmerized by TV, but I see less that they're mesmerized by TV. I see they're more mesmerized by this drama.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
bottom line, Pluto represents power.
yeah,
That empowerment
yeah,
and becoming empowered, being disempowered on the other opposite end, or the abuse of power. And I think, we've really experienced that negative side of the Pluto transit, of Pluto's energy, the power of death and destruction, um, without the benefit of the rebirthing and the regeneration that can also come through Pluto. We've been disempowered as a people. We have felt disempowered. Were we literally disempowered? No. But
right.
we haven't acted in a way to bring our personal power forward and be able to enact the things in the world that we want to. And so maybe this whole bringing Sharon into the picture balances that equation, right? Brings a different piece of the relationship into play in a way that allows us to recapture power, to see how we can empower ourselves, and how we can make changes, or at least set the stage for changes that are a positive, and an empowering way, and not something that takes us back to that death and destruction.
Well, and that's really, at the fundamental level of what we're talking about is how we're having, we are using our power. We're all empowered. We're giving it to this drama, right? You've taken all of your time, energy, and resources, and you've taken the masterful mind that you have, and you've dedicated them like a laser beam on this drama.
Yeah.
And so where is it that we're wasting or allowing our energy? Because it's sometimes we're doing it to ourselves. We'd rather whatever. It doesn't. I could say we'd rather stay disempowered. I'm not sure I believe that anymore. I do know that this is the fastest way to get hold of our power, right? To collectively channel our power, you create a massive boogeyman, like, I don't know, a massive boogeyman with weapons of mass destruction that rules Iraq, just hypothetically, for instance.
Or Iran. I mean, what is it? Republican, a section of the Republicans sent this letter off to Iran.
Again, really, Iraq. That Iraq was just, was the same thing they tried to do with Grenada, right? We're going to invade. We need a lot of war mechanism. I'm not saying it's always used for war. What I'm saying is that these are classics for harnessing our political will as a nation.
Yeah.
Our power. The only power they have is what we give them. And they've harnessed our power and our consent to devote time, energy, and resources to an evil empire that may or may not exist. So we're engaging that, and it is harnessing our energy. It is a power struggle. And so at the end, we don't want to. We may decide to go to war. We may decide that we want to channel our energy towards something, but we don't want to do it if it's just a mythologically created, Wizard of Oz. That's the problem.
Now, is there an ephemeris yet for Sharon? Do we know where it has been and what sign?
Conjoined. So
they're in the same sign.
Yeah, they are a single entity. They are
in lockstep.
That's right. So when we see the Pluto, we're seeing a Pluto-Charon ephemeris. It's going in lockstep. But the inside of that, the GIF I showed you that they're actually doing this together.
Mm-hmm. And so for you, where are the two of them? What house? In your own chart?
Yeah. So I have a Sun Pluto conjunction, Pluto-Charon conjunction in the 5th house. So where I'm likely to see this is, of course, well, I would say that the place it all comes down to that core freedom that we not only associate with the 5th house play, but more along the energy lines of the Sun as ruler of the 5th house. And so creativity and the core relationship to the self. Mm-hmm. Right. So for me, it's about the personal actualization of our personal empowerment. And where that could be, where I see our collective could be creating instead of devoting its time and energy to these mythological demons.
So fascinating, isn't it?
It's a very interesting. It's hugely symbolic. This change. I know that this is hugely symbolic, and I have high hopes. I have very high hopes. I have this sense that really now that I think the 16th or 17th is the final, square, I suspect over the next year or two, we're going to start to see everybody's kind of running out of steam on the revolution, right? Thank God we got to the point of being inept. We really didn't get to blow much up. So it's, well, and kind of good news, right? If we'd all had our way, we would have just been lighting off bombs, apparently. We didn't really make any progress. In a sense, that may be our saving grace.
Mm-hmm.
So now, okay, are we done with all this drama? Because there's still solutions laying all over the ground.
Right. This is perfect because this great segue into the shift that's occurred as of Sunday in terms of, in human design astrology, it's all about the gates, and the gates are the different traits of so forth that the planets are going to express through. Pluto, up until this point, has been in gate 38, which is part of the channel of struggle. The 38 side of that is the gate of the fighter. So it's all about the fight, right? It's about the struggle. And it's not, if we look at it superficially, it's the struggle that we have, the fight that we have, that we've seen in our world. But underneath it all, the fight and the struggle is really all about, it's a mutation. It's about finding the right things that work in the world. And as you're saying, it's like we can throw that one out, that didn't work. Now we can throw this one out, that didn't work. We've had in my lifetime, your lifetime, we're the same age. We've had the war on drugs. We've had a war on terror. Everything has been
Soviet Union. For years, it was the
Cold
Soviet
War.
Union.
Yeah, Cold War. To me, we've had everything has always been termed in the terms of war, as opposed to what is it we are really trying to accomplish. Maybe we're trying to accomplish healthy children or peaceful relationships, but they never get framed that way. They always got framed in the war on this or the war on that. And now the next gate that Pluto has moved into is a gate, gate 54, which has several different meanings. On one level, it's a business gate. It really is about drive and ambition, the drive and ambition to launch something new, to see something different, to the esoteric meaning of that gate is the gate of enlightenment, right? It's one of the more format energy gates. It's down in the root chakra, and it's reaching up to the spleen. And in human design, the spleen is the gate of time and intuition and health. And there are often fears associated with the spleen because it was originally one of the oldest energy centers in the body. It was associated with struggle to survive, survival type energies.
Right.
So the struggle has been about survival. And who's going to be the supreme country power, who's going to come to the forefront, have the biggest economy, the biggest war games or war machine, et cetera, et cetera. But now we're going to see this shift, and it all began on Sunday, which I find interesting. We're in the last square of this Uranus and Pluto, and now we have this shift. Right. And this is a maturing process, by the way. It's not like all of a sudden now we've gained enlightenment. Pluto will be here for many years, and we'll be gaining this sense of enlightenment as we move forward. And we might even be able to start seeing it like the foundation has already been laid for some things. For example, we're seeing the movement in our country, and I don't know what it's doing around the world, but toward equalizing marriage rights, right, for gay and lesbian couples to be able to marry and then ultimately to have families and adopt children and things like that. So we've already seen the economic struggle, right? That struggle that was all about greed and the way things were being done that weren't sustainable, that crashed our economy, and we're just about to recover from that. And are we going to recover and go back to the way things were? Or can we recover and look to a future that doesn't allow for that same thing to happen again, to sort of an enlightened way of being with our economy or with money, or how we deal with each other on an economic basis? We see a lot of terrorist groups developed through this time period, right? Different splinters off of, like you were talking about, the Muslim Brotherhood. There's the whole ISIL. And I'm sure there are any number of other ones that have popped up over this course of time in response to probably the whole war that we began with Iraq in 2003.
Yep.
And yet there's this possibility, this potential underneath it all, that we can deal with this in a different way, because I think we're war weary. Right? I think, the consciousness is coming to us all in this time period now that we're war weary.
Yeah.
Don't give me a war of anything. Tell me how I can create something peaceful, something lasting, something that's equalizing, everybody. And so it's going to be more values based, as opposed to the I get this, that means you suffer this, and those kinds of attitudes are changing. From the very mundane level of this kind of astrology, we're looking at the ego circuit. There's different circuits throughout the human design profile, and it's at the business end of the circuit. And if it's at the business end of the circuit, then that's really where this all begins, and how we deal with ourselves, how we organize ourselves in businesses. And we still have some real big bugs out there. You can think of Monsanto as the one that everybody seems to think of. That's like the worst business out there on the planet. But then we, at least in this country, we have other, wonderful companies like Costco who treat their employees better, and there's the, the smaller companies that are trying to, accommodate employees and work with them in different ways. So we're building from this ground up a different value system, and it's going to begin. I would not be surprised if, while Pluto's in this gate, that at least in this country, something gets repealed, and I'm trying to remember the name of it, where it made corporations entities. What's that law?
I don't know, but corporations have personhood status, as according to law.
Yeah, exactly. And I will not be surprised at all if in these next several years that's repealed, as we rearrange our value system, as we begin to look at a corporation is only as good or as strong as the people that are a part of it. And what are we doing to those people? How are those people being treated? And those people becoming empowered to be able to come up with new ideas and new ways of thinking and new ways of being. So there's a really positive stage that's being set here in the change of the gates with human design for Pluto, but then also with the conversation that you're bringing into this with it. Let's look at this in a bigger picture, right? We've got two bodies orbiting each other here in lockstep. And if we're dealing with relationship here, then where do we begin to create new relationships? How do we create something? There's really something very mystical in this whole gate too, in that enlightenment is one of those key words that we can think of here, but it sort of begins the mystical circuit in the body and energetically. So it has a real different feel to it than it would have had in 38, which was, really about the struggle and the fight. Now we take the fight to, okay, we're done with this. We are so done with this. Now where do we go?
Yeah.
What I find is a little daunting in the near term here is that the planet Uranus, while Pluto was in the gate of the fight, or the fighter, let's call it, Uranus had been sitting at the gate of shock many times throughout the last, couple of years. So we've had, shocking types of things that happen in human design. Shock is not punitive. It's meant for an initiation sort of purpose, right? Putting us back on the path. The opposite gate from shock is that of the love of spirit. And so shock is designed sort of as an initiation into a new way of being, recognizing the real truth of who you are. But so now it's really interesting because Pluto's moving into 54 and sets up enlightenment. Uranus moves back into 51 later this week, just as we're getting ready to go into the eclipse season, right? So we're Uranus-Pluto square. We have a new moon coming. We have a solar eclipse, the equinox. It's like breathless those few days as Uranus also moves into the gate of shock.
Oh, so you're 51 is shock then?
51 is shock, 54 enlightenment. And these two planets, of course, being responsible for all of the revolutionary type things, this energy of revolution and change and crumbling and rebuilding.
Well, I think it's going to be wonderful because of the people.
I think it will.
Here's what I hear from everybody. They're highly conscious people, including, oddly, this weird thing where people are sort of checking out and dying. I have more than one friend who are facing down what seems like insurmountable changes they need to make. They just feel like, the shock is there, or the shock is showing them, oh my gosh, this is nearly insurmountable. But it's almost like shock is the only thing that's going to keep them on that path. I mean, it would be the kindest thing ever if they can keep a regular relationship with that kind of shock that gets their feet moving, because their feet stop moving and slow down because it feels insurmountable. So in a way, I think from my personal life, that shock may be our saving grace. Keep us moving through what feels like it would be insurmountable.
And, the thing about shock is that we all react differently to it. I mean, whether it's a personal shock or whether it's something big that goes on in the world that forces us into looking at a new way of being, it doesn't really matter, because the result is the same. It's that of an awakening, an enlightenment, a process of enlightenment. And now that Pluto has moved into that gate, I think we were really going to be able to see an acceleration of how enlightenment takes hold here. Maybe, a deepening of the conversation around what can we do next, and how do we treat that? How do we meet that face on and not create more wars and more issues?
Well, and I think it's about also when we come out of this massive dream world, where we realize we're tilting at windmills here, right? This is Don Quixote.
Don Quixote.
And we've wasted years. Some people have wasted lives. And, this is, how empowered are we going to be once we have all of our own power back? You don't even have to you don't have to reclaim it from anybody. You just have to stop being knee-jerked into devoting it to these mythological beings. You
said something very profound there, is that it's not our becoming empowered is not taking anybody else's energy or anybody else's power away. And that's how we've played the game already so far.
And we also don't have to get back. We don't have to take our power back from anybody.
We never lost it. We simply
stopped devoting it, right? We've been devoting our power. Nobody had to, come in with forces and say, that's it, United States, shut up. We're all going to war. Keep your mouth shut or I'll shoot you. They were like big boogeyman. We're like, sign us up. Yes, go get them. And so we signed up voluntarily, waved flags. Couldn't wait. So,
and what I really see helping all of this is social media. The very fact that we're having this conversation, we're sitting here in the United States, but we're on a network that's being broadcast out of Europe. And it is literally taking our message right now completely around the world in a way that's not censored, that is raw and in its, pure beauty, just as it is. And we couldn't do that before. We didn't have the means to be able to do that before. And it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference, because then we start to see how much we're alike, how much we really want the same things.
And you're talking about using businesses, right? So Facebook, I don't know what Monsanto's valued at, but I'll bet it's not as much as Facebook is valued at. So when you say Monsanto, big, giant, monstrous, horrible, entity, there's also new businesses, because they're going to make money and sell us stuff eventually, are creating platforms we're using. It does, for good or for ill, we're using them to facilitate what we want. Yeah. So new businesses are in fact the foundation for what we want. That's the fastest, most direct way to create the change we want. Create businesses that support it and just make a profit. I mean, you don't have, nobody's sucking the life out of a Facebook employees to move along.
Well, and no one's saying that companies can't make a profit. I mean, that's not what we're saying, but we're saying that you can't do it on the backs of the people on the planet and at the dampening of everything for everybody. You can't be taking away, you can't be empowering yourself from a deficit. You can only empower yourself from a largesse. And that's the thinking that's gotten us into trouble, is that we always think that if, by giving, then it means that I have less, right? So if a corporation is going to give more money to their employees in terms of dollars per hour, that means they have less profit. But the reality suggests, for example, an oil company has literally billions of dollars of profit at the end of the year or the end of the quarter. And having, put more money in their employees' pockets would not have killed them. And those are the things, the realizations I think that come to these, even a Monsanto is, the big bugaboo at this point in time that I'm thinking of, I'm sure there are others, can come to the recognition that to work with their people gets them further than working against them. To work with the planet gets them further than working against the planet.
The only thing I would say is do not let any of these monstrous corporations retain Wizard of. Here's an example. In my experience with very, very large corporations, bloat and inefficiency is usually what we're seeing. I would say we see far less, Simon Legree and far more completely bloated. They can't even get them. I think of, our great friend Microsoft, which isn't really working in our minds for good or for ill, but they can't barely, they have so much internal bloat that they can't even hardly produce a product anymore, right? Giant, very much like our government. I mean, there's so much. And really what's at the center of that is a whole lot of people who wish to just continue to validate what they're doing and getting their own income. It's actually employees. It's not the superstructure, other than most of these other companies are publicly held. So yes, they can make less profit, well, then wait a minute. What if your 401k is invested? So what would you rather have now, right? You want them to pay more money to their employees, or do you want your 401k to go down? So it's more of an ecosystem and less, and does that mean that everybody's demonstrating good behavior? No. Does that mean that we should do something? Yes. But I would caution us at all cases against it's this wall Wizard of Oz like mythological evil being. And that whoever's behind is just plain evil. You know what? I've seen a lot of things. I've seen corporate psychopaths. I don't mean the people in the corporation are psychopaths, but if you took a corporation and you give it personhood, it would meet a psychopathic, test.
The profile for psychopathy.
Collectively as a psychopath, but I've never met anybody in there. Very rarely have I met anybody inside the organization for whom I would ever give that name. So the people involved can still create something that doesn't behave the way we'd all like. They may be just as disempowered as we are in the face of it. So in creating alternatives, maybe all we can do, starve it.
Yeah. Well, we are running overtime, and that's okay with our producer. He's told us that's fine. I want to bring us a little bit full circle, because one of the things that we named this show was about Pluto, Lord of the Underworld. And I want to say that the more that we bring up those things from the dark, the shadow as we call them, or the things that we've relegated to the unconscious or the subconscious or to the ew factor, right? I don't want to deal with that. Yeah. But the more that we can consciously bring those things out and subject them to the light and to the test of truth. I mean, is it true that this is the way things have to be? The easier this whole transformational energy takes hold on the planet. And, these are big energies, no doubt, and generational energies. It's not like this is going to happen tomorrow, but we each have a little bit of a role that we can play when we take responsibility for ourselves, right? When we clean our own backyard, when we look at our own subconscious, our own unconscious mind, when we dig through the depths of our own underworld and we look and see what's there, that that we're not, where am I separating myself from, or polarizing my own, where are my beliefs polarized, and things like that. So the part of this that is about the underworld is digging into those depths, daring to look to the places that we didn't want to look before. And there's a gift in that. The gift is that we can gain consciousness and that we can start to create from a position of power, a creation from values that we share collectively, instead of from fear or any of the other reasons that we've created the things we've created.
And I would say, while we're talking about this, and, it makes a lot of sense. I bet it makes a lot of sense to most of the viewers. We're not actually talking about something that's all that easy to do. So here's my experience, right? The minute you say, you don't even have to reclaim your big dark shadow. If you just stopped and said, wait a minute, where is all my time and energy going? And how much of it's going into creating the life I'd like to live? What if I stop right there? Because that would change your world, right? Where is the life I want to live? And am I actually not empowered to create that? Here's what you're likely to engage when you make those choices. You're going to get fear from other people. People are going to be starting to rate, because this is a collective dynamic. It's not a personal dynamic. It's a generational process. It's not an individual's process. So withdrawing and walking past basically other people's fear to reclaim this, I have experienced as the great path. You know what? Other people are going to say, well, you know what? You better use disinfectant on your counters, because obviously you must not be a very good mother. You obviously don't care about your family the way that you should, or whatever the narrative. It's people don't let you not be afraid of things that they're afraid of. If you had previously, agreed, they will put up a bit of a little push because it's ingrained for them. They think they're helping, right? They think they're saving you. They think you should be afraid of this. So it is a disengage from the collective to some extent, and it in its own way, it has some challenges. So it
Definitely.
Is with compassion, I say to all of us. With compassion, I say to all of us, take heart and be courageous, and be kind to yourself. And this is not.
And ask new questions.
Yep. And the minute you do it, you're going to open the door for everybody else around you. They may or may not choose it, but doing it, being the first one in your collective who makes these choices means that everybody else, because they're just waiting to see if you get eaten, right? If you don't get eaten, then they're thrilled.
Chances are I'm not going to get eaten.
Are you going to get, because that's what we do as humans, right? Are we going to die, or are we going to get eaten? If you don't die or get eaten, all right, maybe
they're not going to take my firstborn, and they're not going to throw me off the edge of the earth. They're not going to launch me into space. Maybe they should, but they won't. Oh, well, this has been so much fun, and I'm sure there's so much more that we could talk about on this subject, but our time is coming to an end here. But I don't want to leave tonight without saying something, and that is this. The platform that we're using here, the Conscious Consumer Network, has been such a gift to the world. It's the first alternative media network out there that allows the conversations that we're having today to go on. And I dare say that the creative forces behind this have experienced explosive growth. And I don't even think that I understood until today how that has put pressure on this network, because the people involved here really want to be able to allow this to grow and to be organic. And yet we still live in a world that needs money to feed this and to be able to make this grow. So I'm going to ask all of you viewers out here, if you enjoy listening to shows like Living Astrology or Empower You or any of the other ones that if you're on consciousconsumernetwork.tv that you can see there, then please consider making a donation that will allow this platform to continue and to grow in the way that it needs to. There are other languages that they want to bring on, the French and the Spanish and the Dutch translations of shows, and shows from those countries to be shown in their native languages. And right now we need money. If you go to consciousconsumernetwork.tv, on the right side, down a little ways, you're going to see a little red heart. That's the donation page. And your $5, $10, $20 donation goes a long way to helping. And I did it myself today. I'm not usually one that takes up causes. I would rarely be on a show saying that, but I really believe in what we're doing. And I want to see it continue, and I want to see it be able to grow. So please consider that. And everybody, have a stellar week. Bye, Bryn. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you, Janet.
Good night.
All right, folks, welcome back to CCN. This ain't your mama's radio station. This is your daddy's radio station. Anyways, TV, excuse me, live and in color.
Good evening from my very own living room in London. My name is Sasha. For those of you who do know me, behind me is Avi, who's my producer. First off, I just want to say Mel, V, and Biggie, well done, guys. Seriously, well done. CCN has gone live, it's taken off.
This platform right here is a million times more progressive than anything I'll see on CNN, on Fox, on any of those time wasters. I don't care if they have the $1 million sets. We have the unlimited wealth of what we're doing.
Just all of us have been waiting for a long time for this amalgamated news network.
I mean, what CCN is that it's actually revolutionizing our world, because I think you are, just like I am, absolutely fed up with the brainwashing television that we see on the mainstream. So it's, I think, very important that we now join our hands together and support this beautiful platform of CCN.
You know, we're in a time now where, because of great things like CCN, we have a real opportunity to not only turn this into a real light experience, a beacon of truth for many more.
The places that technology have taken us are just amazing, and you know, it's just to be on a call like this. And you're right, technology wasn't there 5 years ago.
Yeah, just amazing.
And for everybody watching, hey, keep paying attention to this network, because just my experience with it and the technology that they're using, it's not rocket science, but it's stable, and we've got a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of voices to hear, lots of information to share, and I hope this takes off and just flies, because the world has had a void when it comes to this kind of information and the tools that we have in specific to empower people.
And I think we have a caller. Let me see here. Hi, you're in the air. May I have your name?
And I just wanted to call in to say thank you to Lisa and to Wendy and to everybody for just always being there. So recently, you know, through all that's happened, I just 2 months ago, I was like, we got to buy a new TV. I bought a smart TV. I never watched TV. I didn't even know why I wanted a smart TV. And I was like, this is weird, but just went with it, bought the TV, put the TV up. And now, every night when I come home, I put on CCN. And my whole family sits and watches it.
Oh,
and they're like, what is this? What is this? And tonight it was on, and my son was walking around, and he turns around and goes, it's like these people are talking directly to you. And I was like, what? No. And it's been a really great, like, I just wanted to share that, because here I went from having my earphones in and having nobody listening to me to now it's on. We discuss it constantly. And I just wanted to say thank you, because if it wasn't for you, I probably wouldn't be here, and I would be, you know, like a zombie like everybody else. And I just try to remember that all the time. And your empathy and your compassion is powerful, and your kindness to everyone who steps in and questions you and doesn't quite get it or gets defensive. I've always been amazed through all these years of how powerful your empathy is that you express to people. And it's a wonderful thing. And I know you worked so hard at this, and I just wanted to take a moment to tell you how grateful I am, and to let you know that it does penetrate out, and that everybody is, you know, I have a whole family now that's like, what's this? And interested and asking questions.
That's
so thank you.
That's awesome. I mean, you've got kids?
Well, they're grown, they're adults, you know, but they're here. I have 4 kids, 2 live at home, and my husband, and they're all quite interested. And I like it.
Well,
yeah.
Mel and Biggie will be very, 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 very happy in the background there, knowing that CCN's playing at your place all the time. That's brilliant. I mean, that was the hope. That was the the hope to get this.
And when you,
mainstream.
when I heard that one time on TV, I was like, yeah, and like nobody turns it off, nobody walks away, everybody kind of stays and is like glued to the TV, and I'm like, this is amazing. So you guys are doing fabulous work, and once again, I just want to say thank you so much. I love you guys. You do a great job.
Oh,
Thank
love
you
you
so
too. Thank you so much for calling in and sharing that. It's great to hear. And, we always encourage people to give feedback. And, please keep calling in and share experiences and share as you're growing through this journey. Share it with us. Like, we want you to be a part of this. And that's why we have the live call number for you guys to call in and, stay in touch. And, we want to be a part of your journey. Please.
Well, I do certainly feel that way, and I am so grateful. Thank you. So carry on.
We sure will.
And here's to a bright future, right?
Yeah.
Same to you. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have an amazing
guys.
night.
And
You too.
CCN,
Thanks.
I just wanted to add that CCN is there as a resource for us all.
Yes.
It's a resource for the alternative media to have a platform like this to broadcast from, but it's also a really good resource for everybody who watches and follows and listens to alternative media to be able to introduce it in a familiar and family-friendly way to those who would normally be watching CNN instead of CCN.
Exactly.
And that was always the vision. So it's there for us all.
Definitely.
And I'm eternally grateful to Biggie and Mel, because this was our concept within One Network. This is exactly what we wanted to do. These were the plans, and it was this one element, the live video broadcasting, that was the trickiest one to overcome, because it requires a lot of money,
Yes.
and a lot of resources, a lot of technology, and it was, we don't have any of that. So even though we set the to me it was a brilliant exercise in manifestation. We put the intent out there, I did all the research, and I knew what a big job it was going to be, and then along comes these two. Says, hey,
Yeah, you guys, they're amazing, and I want to say thank you too on the show to both Mel and to Biggie, because you guys are incredible, and and I'm honored, like I said, to be a part of this. This means a lot to me, to be able to reach people and to help them, and you guys are just incredible. And on that same note that you're talking of, that Lisa, truly, Biggie's messaging.
Biggie's blushing in the background.
I love it. But truly, it is very expensive, and if you guys can donate, please do so. I know that, we do ask to do that. You need to understand that, we do this because it's our passion. It's from our heart. And, we don't have the financing, not any one of us individually. It is about trying to come together, and we're donating our time to do this. And we want to do this. I don't want to give the impression that this isn't what we want to do, but we could use your help. So if you guys can make